I reviewed 220 different consulting presentations from McKinsey, BCG, Bain, and other top consulting firms to figure out what are the slides that consultants use the most. And I found something interesting. I found that consultants use the same 5 slides over and over and over again. And this means something, right? It means that these slide layouts work. So in this video, I'm going to share with you the 5 different slide layouts that consultants use and how you can use them too. So this is the bread and butter of any consulting presentation. And as you can see in this McKinsey slide, on the left-hand side, you have a chart. On the right-hand side, you have like a description or an insight. Now, if you're not a consultant, you're likely just to plop a chart on a slide, call it a day. But on the other hand, consultants are much more likely to kind of pair their chart with insights or a description on the slide body, just like this. In this case, the McKinsey chart is reasonably complex. It has a few buttons, which are those circles on the chart there, and each of those buttons needs a description. So that's why they've included the right-hand side. By the way, I want to highlight the effective use of color here. So you can see that near zero is blue, both on the chart, but also on the button in the descriptions. Balancing act is red, again, both on the chart and in the descriptions. Transition is purple, and again, it's on the chart and in the descriptions, but you'll know that purple is a combination of blue and red. Interesting. And finally, rapid growth is black and extends off the edge of the chart. But again, it's the same on the button in the description. So it's really effective what they've done here by aligning the colors in the chart on the left with the insights on the right, which connects the two. And it makes it really easy for the reader to link the buttons with the definitions. But what if you need to show more data than is possible on one chart? Well, in that case, you use consultants' favorite slide, the panel slide. As I said, sometimes the insight that you want to show requires more data. In that case, you use a panel slide. And as you can see in this McKinsey slide, a panel slide essentially divides a slide into multiple columns, and each of those columns has a different chart or visualization. So here, McKinsey are communicating the insight that developers report improved agility and resilience in cloud environments. Then they support that insight with 3 data points: release frequency, time to deploy, and time to recover. And again, I want to highlight an interesting observation, which is they always choose the same types of colors to show the same types of things. And what I mean is, across all 3 charts, the fastest time is always in the darkest color. And that consistency is important for a panel slide. And here's an example from BCG. So this is from their project called Loose Dogs in Dallas. And it's a good example of the relationship between each panel and the overall action title. So panel 1 says, Dallas is home to 350,000 dogs. Panel 2 says, low adoption of spay and neuter in southern Dallas. And panel 3 says, high population growth. And those 3 things combine to become the action title. And this also shows that you can use different chart types in each panel, and that's totally fine. On the left is a waterfall chart. In the middle is a stacked 100% column chart, and on the right is a grouped column chart. But importantly, just like McKinsey did in the slide we just looked at, BCG keep the colors consistent. So red is always intact dogs. And this connects the charts and helps the reader understand the insights as they relate to one another across the different panels. And finally, here's an example from Bain. So this time it shows 3 different area charts. So in the BCG example we just discussed, each of the panels contributes to the action title. Here, Bain are doing the same thing. However, in this case, the action title is saying there's a combination of different realities, so the reader needs to compare across each panel. It doesn't sum up like the BCG slide does, but they compare and contrast with one another. This is another great example of how important it is to be consistent across the panels. And as you can see here, Bain have grayed out the same time period across each chart. By the way, I have a full database of 220 publicly available presentations from top consulting firms, which is where I got these slides from, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. Now, the third popular slide that consultants use is called the table slide. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Dan, I know what a table is, please move on. Fair enough, but you might be surprised at how versatile these tables are and how they use them. So let's start with this McKinsey slide. This is a good example of a text-heavy table slide. Now, these slides are really good to describe groupings, categories, or lists to show a to from relationship or to show a contrast between different groups. So in this case, McKinsey are contrasting myths versus realities. Now, one thing that consultants often do is they add icons to their table slides. So this softens up the table a bit and reduces that wall of text effect that you get sometimes. And ideally, you want those icons to have a consistent style like McKinsey have done here. Now let's look at a data-heavy version of a table slide. Now this one's from Bain. You've probably built slides with data tables before, although I have a feeling that you might look at this slide and wonder, why is it so much better than mine? There are three subtle but important things that Bain does here. Firstly, they consciously group each country based on, in this case, COVID outcomes. Then they color code each group and they add a legend at the top. So this adds some structure to a very heavy table slide. Secondly, the table has multiple levels of hierarchy. So it's not just a simple row of headers. They've grouped each column into sort of higher level, higher order groups, which improves understandability. So this is a good example of the structured thinking that consultants bring to the table. And thirdly, as I mentioned in the last McKinsey example, they've included flag icons, which softens the table, so it's not all just data and text. So as I mentioned, these table slides are really commonly used by consultants, but there's actually an advanced version of this table slide that's really consulting-esque. These are the ones you look at and think, oh, that's a consulting slide. And it's called the combination table slide. Combination table slides bring together both tables and visualizations. So as you can see in this EY example, they start with a table that includes text and icons, just like the McKinsey example we looked at earlier, but in addition, they've included a column with a slider. Now this does a couple of things. Firstly, the purpose here is to make it simple for the reader to compare across groups. They could simply write low, medium, high in that column, but instead they've included a visualization to make it easier to compare and comprehend. Secondly, it breaks up a text-heavy slide, so it's very beneficial in that way as well. And here's an example from BCG. So they've done something similar to the EY slide, but they've used a bar chart here. Again, they could have just written the number in the last column, but it's more difficult for the reader to comprehend and compare across rows. You can't just glance at the numbers and immediately understand the relativities. So the visualization makes it much easier for the reader. So as I said, these are the slides that you almost exclusively see come from consultants, but there's no reason that you can't make them as well. So finally, let's look at the most difficult slide to build, known as the framework or conceptual slide. So these are far and away the hardest slides to build. If you don't know what I'm really talking about when I say conceptual slide, they represent an idea or a concept visually. So instead of using raw text or bullet points, they typically use shapes and diagrams and models to communicate the same thing in a more clear way. It looks something like this. Now this slide is from McKinsey and it's showing a cloud security framework. Now, framework slides are really tricky because you can't just grab them off the shelf and use them. They need to be custom built for your specific situation, problem, or concept. So how do you do it? Well, typically frameworks are made up of various concepts, and you should ask yourself these questions when you're thinking about how to put them together. So one, is there a hierarchy of concepts, or are some concepts different than others? So in the McKinsey example, they've differentiated framework elements from cloud-specific elements. So they've made a distinction between two types of concepts. Number two, what concepts can be grouped together? So McKinsey have grouped together a number of items underneath standards. And three, is there a sequence or order of concepts? So here McKinsey have identified that there's a clear process or a flow to the concepts that they've put down the side. Now, once you know these things, you can start testing out different structures and combinations on your slide, and you could end up with something like McKinsey have here. Let's take a look at another example, this time from BCG. So this framework's a little bit simpler. You can see that they've identified that their framework is fundamentally a process, or it's sequence-based. They've identified that there's three different broad stages or groups, and they've colored each of them differently. They've also identified that not everything fits in a simple linear sequence, and some things enter at the appropriate point at the side, and some things underlie everything. So that's a final type of slide called the framework slide. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below and I'll answer every single one of them. and I'll also leave links below for our courses and slide templates.